Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 690, and today's date is June 10th, 2015, and the title of this episode is U.S. Military Assets Are Now Pre-Positioned for the Upcoming War. Now, before I get started, I just wanted to let everyone know, tomorrow, Thursday, I'll be uploading an interview with Simon Black. He is from Sovereign Man. If you're on the X22 Report alert system, you'll get emailed. If you're on YouTube and you subscribe to the channel, hopefully YouTube will email you and let you know that video is up and running. If not, you can just go to the X22 Report Spotlight channel, which is different than the X22 Report channel, and you can see that video. You can also go to the x22report.com site. You will see the video on the right-hand side. Let's get right into the economic collapse news. Now, we understand time is running out for Greece. They have a $1.9 billion debt repayment to the IMF by the end of this month. And we know they skipped a payment. We understand they're in talks with Germany trying to iron out this deal. We understand they're in talks with BRICS, with Russia. And we see the people are saying, you know something? We better get the rest of our money out of the banks. Right now, people are rushing back to the banks. There are ATM lines, and as of this week, we can see that people are taking out their money. About 500 million euros left the system last Friday. 300 million more is leaving the system. And at this point in time, people are very nervous that the entire thing is going to collapse and Greece is going to default. And they're very afraid of a bank holiday. And this is why they're going to the banks and saying, you know something, let's take this money out. I'd rather have it in my hands than in the bank's hands, because if it's in the bank's hands, guess what? I will never be able to touch it. And they're absolutely right. They will not be able to get to it. Look what happened in Cyprus. People went to sleep on Friday, woke up Saturday, couldn't get their money out. Everything was locked down. Actually, their money was stolen from them. Here in the United States, we have a completely different story. Everything is fine. We're in a recovery. Well, this is what the U.S. government central bankers want you to believe. But what we're seeing is that the economy is starting to slip, fall apart, collapse. But nobody wants to talk about this. Everyone's staying very quiet about it. It reminds me of the summer prior to the stock market crash of 2008, where you see major corporations laying off thousands upon thousands of people. But they tell you it's cost cutting. We want to do this. This is good for the company. This is how we do it. And then all of a sudden we see companies then laying off thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people when the entire system comes crumbling down. We know the job numbers are fake, phony, and false. And JP Morgan economist Michael Feroli said the economy will produce even fewer jobs in the future. Well, the only jobs that are being produced right now are waiters, waitresses, bartenders, temp help. The full, good-paying jobs are completely disappearing. And we're seeing major corporations continually laying off people. Of course, the U.S. government's not reporting on this because they cut that department back in 2013 where they don't report on layoffs. So we're seeing right now that everything is crumbling apart. More jobs are not going to be added. And if they are, it is part-time work coming from full-time, because you have to remember, when they count a part-time job, it's counted as a full-time. If you get 2 part-time, it's 2 full-time jobs. And we realize that we have many bubbles forming. Tech bubble, derivative bubble, stock market bubble, treasury bond bubble, student loan bubble, auto bubble, housing bubble. We are a bubble economy. And we can see the government is very concerned about the student loan bubble because they can't really touch that, and the taxpayers can't bail this out like they can with the auto industry, the housing industry, the derivative market, the stock market, the tech market. because you cannot go bankrupt on a student loan. And they're trying to figure out ways of how they can allow the people to default, how they can allow the people to write it off. And we're seeing that right now, those people who have attended Corinthian college that closed down, there's about $3.6 billion worth of student loans, and the government is saying that they will forgive these loans. They will cancel all student debt, discharge the debt in bankruptcy. I mean, 90% of students at for-profit schools have taken out loans to pay for their education. That is a lot. And we're seeing the federal government now maneuvering and trying to figure out ways of allowing the students to default. And what they're saying is very interesting, is that the plan that they're coming up with is the government will consider forgiving any loans made directly by the government, those held by the majority of the 43 million Americans with student debt, so long as the borrower can document a school persuaded him or her to take out the loan under conditions that would violate state laws. The Education Department plans to use a provision of decades of old federal law that allows borrowers to have loans discharged if they can prove their schools broke a state law, such as by using false advertising or other deception to lure them in to apply and borrow funds. So let me get this straight. We have the U.S. government right now telling everyone to go back to school. Why? So they can get a great paying jobs. Take out the student loans. You will get this fantastic job. The student goes ahead, they take out the loans, they go to college. There's no jobs. Because as we know, and we've been reporting on this, 80% of students cannot find that high-paying job. And I'm not talking about the part-time work or they're getting work in a field that they didn't go to college for. I'm talking about that full-time, great-paying job. So the government has told you to go back to school. The college says, yeah, don't worry. Unemployment's coming down. We're placing our students. You go into college. You take out that $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 worth of loans each year. And you can't find a job. So now the government is saying, this is perfect. Lawyers will jump into this. They will prove the college can't place these students. They lied about what type of jobs are out there. And most of the people will not be able to find a job. So it will allow these students to write off their debt. And it will allow the government to bail out the student loan debt bubble. So you can see what they're doing at this point. Because right now, all these loan modifications, deferments for students is not working. They still can't make these little payments because they're getting part-time work. So what we have right now is the U.S. government, central bankers, has figured out a way to allow the taxpayers to pay for this entire student loan bubble. So the government's going to borrow from the Fed. The government is going to pay for these student loans, and the taxpayers will have to pay this back. And this will be an ongoing cycle, because then the government will come out and say, listen, go back to school if you really want a great job. And they can keep this system going. This is what they're doing right now. But there are less and less jobs for the students. And word is going to get around sooner or later and say, listen, don't even go to college. It's a waste of time. This is why they're bringing in the illegals. They need to continually add more and more people into the system to take out and blow up all these bubbles. So it looks like they figured out a way, just like in the auto industry and the housing market, to continually inflate these bubbles. And we will see more of this. We will see more colleges saying, listen, we have no jobs for you, we're closing down. Or we'll see more of these lawsuits occurring where we'll see that students are getting their student loans wiped away in bankruptcy. We see in the housing market, things are starting to slow up. The growth rate fell to 16% in 2014 from 20% and dipped down even further, especially in certain markets like Miami. Now, Miami has been built up. It's a bubble, just like many of the other cities. A lot of foreign investors are coming in and purchasing these condos. And now we're starting to see that things are starting to slow up. We're starting to see the rate of growth is starting to slow and starting to decline at this point in time. And we see the trend has continued, and we're at this top point and it's starting to slide. Many developers are now having a difficult time locating buyers as whole countries are priced out of the market because the dollar is increasing in value. It's getting tougher and tougher. And people normally ask me, like, well, I don't understand the housing market. They're telling us it's fantastic. Things are going perfectly. More and more people are buying houses. And I've said this before, but we're getting real evidence now that these hedge funds, investment companies, they don't buy like one or two homes. These companies buy thousands and thousands of homes. Cerberus Capital Management is buying about 4,200 U.S. houses, expanding its homes for the rental market. Now, what they do is they go out and they buy these homes. They hold on to them. They don't sell them. They try to rent them. This is just one investment company that's doing this. There are many more that are doing this right now. Right now, this capital management firm has about $25 billion under management. They are a landlord to thousands upon thousands of homes. And we see this with many more companies like Blackstone, Colony Capital. So when you see the housing market improving and their existing homes are improving, these investment companies, hedge funds, capital management firms, they're buying houses by the thousands. They could be foreclosed homes. They could be people that are just selling their homes, and their instructions are to hold on to them. And this is what they are doing. And this is why you see the housing market is not driven by the people, but it's driven by the central bank, by giving free money to allow this to occur. Now, we understand the United States government central bankers, the private Western central bank system is on its last legs. They're not out there making economic deals with any country anymore. They're not saying, hey, we'll help you build your infrastructure. Actually, what they're doing is the United States government central bankers are bringing in troops into certain areas to keep what they have. But we see the BRICS system and Russia, they're out there making economic deals all over the place. We see the BRICS Development Bank and the AIIB. They're going into South and Central American countries to develop their infrastructure. And the Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean saying this is the best place for us to be is with the BRICS and the AIIB to help us build our country, to build our infrastructure. They didn't mention the United States. They didn't mention the United Kingdom. They didn't mention the IMF. They're turning towards the new system. And this is why the United States government central bankers have been trying so hard to get into these countries, because they did not want this to happen. They wanted to place a central bank, put their natural resources on the dollar, to continually keep the system propped up until they could get the wars started. So all eyes are off of them, and they're on another evil country, another group, to blame them for the disaster for this economy. And of course, they're continually trying with taxes and other things to bring in revenue. And I talk about Obamacare quite a bit. But right now, Obamacare is becoming very unpopular. Right now, A new Washington Post ABC News poll finds that a record 54% of Americans oppose Obamacare because they're starting to figure out that Obamacare is not really for the people. It's not really that different than what we had, except it's more expensive, I get less benefit, and if I don't want it, I have to still pay with a penalty. What did he actually really do? What? He gave subsidies to the poor to allow them to get health insurance. And we can see that is falling apart because we see a Supreme Court ruling is getting ready to be decided. And if it does, these people are going to have to pay back that money. This entire system is unconstitutional. And he knows it. The central banking system knows it. The insurance companies know it. This was done for the benefit of the insurance companies, the benefit of the government to bring in revenue, not for the people. If it was for the people, I don't think the government would have exempted themselves from the entire healthcare system of the Affordable Care Act. Because it would have been so great, they would have been the first ones to join up. But guess what? They decided, you know what, we'll pass on this. We see emails out there showing that the TPP, the TTIP, was written by industry lobbyists for the benefit of corporations, the banks, and not for the people. Well, that's what the Affordable Care Act was written by. Actually, most of these bills today are not written for the benefit of the people. It's written for the benefit of whatever organization they're being written for. And this is something that needs to be completely changed when we introduce a new government and we get rid of this. We need a lot of different rules. We need some things to change where they can't accept bribes from lobbyists, bribes from outside corporations. That's what I call them. It's bribes. I mean, if you're working in a financial firm, one of the SEC rules is you cannot accept gifts from another company or sales group because they don't want you to be persuaded to give them information. So you can't really accept anything. It should be the same in government. No acceptance of foreign money, no acceptance of money from corporations, no acceptance of money anywhere. This would stop a lot. And of course, we need to get rid of the central bank. Because why do you think the central bank is in power? Because they give free money to the government employees, which are the government officials. I call them the employees. Because what would be the other reason why the central bank is in power? What do they do? I mean, it's a private company. They're not benefiting the people. They're benefiting themselves. What's the purpose of them? There is no purpose. The Constitution states that the government can create their own money and loan it out without interest. So why in the world would we have a central bank? It makes no sense. And if there was a central bank, why is it private? I mean, think about all of this. And we see that there are groups out there, advocacy groups, the public citizen advocacy group, saying that this TPP agreement undermines the U.S. healthcare system. Peter Mabarduk from Public Citizens Global Access saying that the Obama's secretive negotiation process acting at the behest of pharmaceutical companies has subjected Medicare to a series of procedural rules that would limit Congress' ability to enact policy reforms that would reduce prescription drug costs for Americans and might even open to challenge aspects of our healthcare system today. And saying this would also have an effect in other countries like New Zealand, Australia, Japan, Latin America, Southeast Asia. And we can see that this is all benefiting corporations, not the people. This is why they're pushing this. They're saying the TTIP will trigger a wave of privatization. And we know for a fact, the bankers, the corporations, they love to privatize. They love to purchase the resources of a country. I mean, we see it happen when the central banks put these countries into debt. They come in and they sell off parts of the country to other corporations. We saw it happen in Greece. We see it in Cyprus. We see it in Ukraine right now. And we understand the government is trying to, and continually trying to, shut the American people up. They don't want people to have the right to speak freely. And we see the U.S. Department of Justice is now sent out subpoenas to Reason.com over comment section. The United States Department of Justice is using federal grand jury subpoenas to identify anonymous commenters engaged in typical internet bluster and hyperbole in connection with the Silk Road prosecution. Department of Justice is targeting Reason.com, a leading libertarian website. And we see that many aspects of the First Amendment have been kind of restrictive. We see that they set up First Amendment zones, like with fences and things like that. We see in colleges, they have little sections where they say, if you'd like to speak freely, you can speak freely in this zone. Because other zones, there is no free speech. I mean, we saw it in California. That's one place where a student was handing out the Constitution on campus, and administrators came up and said, listen, this is not like the 60s. You don't have free speech. If you like to do this, you need to go into a certain area to do this. You just can't run around and hand out the Constitution. That's ridiculous. Well, free speech is not designated to an area. Free speech is everywhere. And they're continually trying to shut the American people up. They're trying to get rid of the rights of the people. They're trying to do this by convincing the next generation that, yes, your rights can be changed. And we see in Common Core where they're trying to convince the students that rights are a privilege, but they're not a privilege. You're born with them. The government cannot take them away, but they're trying to convince the next generation that, yes, we can take them away if we want. And this is what they're teaching our children in school today. And we can see a lot of these people who are commenting on Reason.com are being subpoenaed because of certain things they've said, like, it's judges like these that should be taken out back and shot. And of course the judge is saying, okay, these are threats. We have to subpoena these. We've got to find out who the anonymous commenters are. And the grand jury subpoena specifies that it is seeking evidence in regard to an alleged violation of Title 18 United States Code, Section 875. In other words, the U.S. Attorney's Office is looking for evidence of violation of the federal law against interstate threats, which is absolutely ridiculous. These are people who are frustrated, pissed off, who are speaking their mind. And we can see right now the government is overreaching because they don't like what people are saying about a certain judge or government employees. And under this law, the speaker must have some level of knowledge or intent that the hearer will take the threat seriously. And with most of these people, it'd be very, very difficult to prove that they're taking this very, very seriously. This is a sounding board. But again, what they're trying to do is show people that, listen, we can control what you say, and we will find you if you speak like this. Well, I hate to say it, but the First Amendment allows us to speak like this, allows us to talk about our concerns, because people are going to say, well, there's a certain type of talk and certain types of free speech that you can do. Really? Which are they? Let me know. And who's judging which you can and what you can't? Because once you start to do that, it's not free anymore. It's controlled. Because then you start saying, well, that's hate speech. Well, we're going to have to limit that. Well, that speech sounds like it's a threat, so we're going to have to limit that. Well, I don't like that you're saying this to this group, so we're going to have to get rid of that. That's no longer free. Free speech is you can say whatever you want. And then the people decide, you know something, I'm not going to listen to that. I'm not going to go to that site. I'm not going to listen to what they say. Because once the government or a Supreme Court tells you what you can or cannot say, it's no longer free. It's controlled speech. And this is what we're seeing the government do. They started out with the politically correct. Think about what they're doing. They're shifting you into a certain path. Okay, you can't say this, but you can say that. Be politically correct. Actually, they're controlling what you say. That's what they're doing. And now they're taking it a step further. Now, out in South Korea, we see the U.S. government is going to sell South Korea an Aegis missile defense system worth $1.9 billion. The State Department has made a determination approving a possible foreign military sale to the Republic of Korea for the Aegis combat systems and associated equipment, parts, and logistical support for an estimated cost of about $1.9 billion. And we know that they've already brought in the Apache helicopters that they sold there. We also know they upgraded their Patriot missile system. They brought in the THAAD missile system because they are getting prepared. They're getting ready to encircle China and North Korea. And this is why we see all this occurring right now. Out in Ukraine, what are we seeing? Well, the people in Donetsk and Lugansk, they've drafted the new constitution, the amendments to the constitution that they were supposed to do for the Minsk II agreements. And they're going to submit them to Ukraine, the government of Ukraine. But we can see at this point in time, Poroshenko, he doesn't really care. He's not following the Minsk II agreement. He's violating it at every step. And we can see right now there is reports coming in that heavy weapons are being moved around Ukraine. They're being moved to, I'm going to try to pronounce this, Krasnogovka area. And they're continually doing this. It seems like they are setting up for a major offensive, which we know this is exactly what they're doing. And what they do is they pull out the heavy weapons, they move it to a different area, and they're continually doing this to confuse to confuse the OSCE. Because as soon as the OSCE moves out of that area, they bring back the weapons. And we see NATO at this point in time, because we know this offensive is coming, they are going to bring in additional military medical assistance. They're going to boost long-term medical services provided to the Ukrainian military, as well as bolstering medical rehabilitation in the country. Now, why are they doing this at this time? Because once this offensive starts, there's going to be a lot of military personnel, soldiers, who are wounded. So they are boosting this. We see out in the Middle East, the International Committee of the Red Cross has warned of a worsening humanitarian situation in Yemen. 26 million civilians are at risk. They need food, they need water, fuel, medical aid. And as we know, the U.S. and their proxy force, Saudi Arabia, they keep all humanitarian aid back. They stopped the bombing for a short period of time, and now there is no humanitarian aid being brought into Yemen. And the people are having a very difficult time. And we see they're continually pushing talks with preconditions, and the Houthis are saying, well, no, you've laid out what you want us to do. You really don't want to talk. You just want us to lay down our weapons, surrender, and accept the new puppet government, the same puppet government back into power. Well, these aren't talks then. These are conditions. And that's exactly right. We see that the UN is saying, listen, the Libyan factions need to agree quickly on a joint government, or else something will happen in Libya. And we see they're pushing the propaganda that the Islamic State now has taken over a lot of the Libyan oil ports. Well, of course they are, because it's the proxy army of the United States. They probably brought in a force in there and said, listen, capture these oil ports. We don't want the government of Libya, which is in Tripoli, to take these oil ports, because we don't want them selling the oil not using the dollar. And this is why they moved the central bank. This is why they're trying to control this region, because they're protecting their oil. They're continuing with the oil sales on the dollar. This is what they're worried about. And we can see as time goes on and the battle rages in Libya, eventually, with everything going on, they are going to go back in there to reinstate the puppet government. We see it's happening in Libya. The United States Department approves 6 military aircraft to Lebanon. And this is a big deal of about $462 million arms deal. The deal includes 6 A-29 Super Tucano planes, which are military aircraft specialized in light attacks, counterinsurgency, close air support, and reconnaissance missions. Everything is being pre-positioned right now. They're bringing in the military assets to all these puppet governments. They're bringing in more troops into the region. Of course, they call them advisors. We see Israel is out there saying that they're getting worried about the Golan Heights, the borders on Syria, but we know they use this to supply the Islamic State with medical help, with arms. They support the Free Syrian Army. The report came out from the UN saying, yes, we have reports that this is true, because they are getting ready to maneuver into Syria to take out Assad. And this is all building up right now. We see the U.S. is going to be bringing in about 500 to 1,000 more troops into Iraq. They're going to set up the 5th base inside Iraq. It's mission creep. They're continually doing this. Pretty soon there'll be 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 advisors, which we know are combat-ready Marines, ready to go at a moment's notice. And we can see right now that the United States this week began transferring to Iraq the U.S. 82nd Airborne Division. Military sources report that the first batch of 500 officers and men will be deployed to Baghdad and the Kurdish Republic's capital of Erbil, followed by another 500 in July. And Dempsey said there will be no radical change in the U.S. approach in Iraq. Of course, keep the confusion going, pretend the Islamic State is taking over the country. The people are rising up. They want the country back. They're battling those people. Eventually, with all this chaos, they would love to split up Iraq. They have already tried this. They issued a bill into the Iraqi government saying, hey, why don't we split up the country into Sunni, Shiite, and Kurdish? And the government said, absolutely not. This is their main plan, to take all these countries and to completely split them up into different regions. This is the goal for this. Syria will be included, and so will Iran. We know the United States government, central bankers, created the Islamic State, control the Islamic State. And when U.S. intelligence was asked a direct question saying, do you support the Islamic State? Do you pay for Al-Qaeda? Do you give them weapons? The State Department had no comment on this. Wouldn't they just come out and say, absolutely not, we do not do this? Why did they say no comment? That tells us that, yeah, they're supporting them. It is the proxy army for the United States. We see the U.S. Senate right now, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee has approved a bill that condemns violence in Syria and calls on the State Department to report to Congress on war crimes made by Assad. The bill denounces the use of chemical weapons, the targeting of civilian populations with barrel and cluster bomb and missiles, and gross human violations carried out by Assad. Now that's very strange, because they put this in there about cluster bombs, and Saudi Arabia is using cluster bombs in Yemen. Kind of a double standard here, isn't it? Their proxy army, the Islamic State, is using chlorine weapons in Syria. But you can see what they're going for. They're going to get Assad. We see the Islamic State in Syria blew up a gas pipeline that fed natural gas into Damascus, which gave generated electricity and heat to homes there. They're breaking down the infrastructure, getting ready to make their move into this region. And this is why we see all of this happening in Iraq, because they want to build up the forces. They want to bring over the military assets. We already know there's a $1.6 billion military asset budget to bring in arms into this area. They are getting ready because these arms are not going to stay in Iraq. They're going to be shipped off to the Islamic State in Syria. And eventually we will see the push for the authorization for war. Government employees are out there saying, removing Assad is the best way to defeat the Islamic State in Syria. No, removing Assad meets your goal. That's what they're trying to accomplish here. We see in Iran, during the P5+1 talks, a computer virus was used to hack into venues linked to the international talks, and Kaspersky Lab said, yeah, this was a virus, and we tracked it back to 3 luxury European hotels, and it seems it could have been Israel that was involved in this, and we know they don't want the P5+1 talks to go forward. We know they're completely against it. We know they've been telling us, Netanyahu has been telling us, that Iran's going to have a nuclear weapon in 3 to 5 months, and he's been spouting this out for years, actually going all the way back, and I'm not saying he did this all the way back, but Israel, the United States government, went all the way back 30 years telling us that Iran's going to have a nuclear weapon in 3 to 5 months. Where is it? There is no nuclear weapon. This is propaganda. They would love to get into this country. They need to get into Syria. We see the United States, the French government is out there saying the Islamic State group has cyber attacked the French television network TV5. And they're saying that actually we believe it was done by Russia-based backers. So now they're making connections using the propaganda that it was absolutely Russia that did this. Here in the United States, we see the propaganda of Russia doing cyber attacks. They're blaming it on China. They're doing whatever they possibly can to forward their agenda. For China, they don't want the yuan renminbi to become a reserve currency. For Russia, they're continually demonizing, saying, they have malware in our financial systems. They have malware in the infrastructure system. So when the entire system comes down, they can say, see, it was Russia, because there is a definite buildup here. And we understand that Israel was using dirty bombs, experimenting with them. We understand in Michigan and California and other places they were having these dirty bomb drills. And we can see, and as we know, they're getting ready to do something in this arena. Because we have Australian intelligence. They're reporting that the Islamic State right now has enough radioactive material to create their own dirty bomb. And the 40-block nation of NATO is expressing concern. The U.S. is concerned about this because we've already seen the Islamic State here in the United States. And they're saying that they could use this in any of the cities. And as we know, if this does occur, this is a false flag event. They've been training for it. Israel has been testing it. And we know the Islamic State is the proxy army for the U.S. government. And we know they want the authorization for war passed. They need it to be passed. They need to go wherever the Islamic State is. And now they're reporting the Islamic State now is in Russia. Remember, the U.S. government can go wherever the Islamic State is, no matter what country it is in. And this is why we're going to see a run-up to get this passed with some type of an event. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.